And when we don't see our parents fight and struggle to resolve conflict because we want to give our children the idea that we live in a perfect family, that's when we have difficulties with expressing ourselves, knowing what our needs are.
Because you learned not to be confrontational in a relationship because, you don't want to upset people. Therefore, when you go into a relationship yourself and maybe your partner wants to thrash something out, you feel, I suppose attacked. Rachel, what a pleasure it is to have you here today.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Can you explain to people who you are and what you do?
Yes, I'm Rachel Gotto, and predominantly I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and a midlife coach. I'm also an author of a book called Flying on the Inside, which is the story of my life of trauma and recovery, and I'm also a TEDx speaker, amongst other things.
Okay, busy. Hypnotherapy. What is it?
Hypnotherapy is, as it says, it's a hip therapy, and it deals with working with the subconscious mind. And it's something I'm really passionate about because we all have brains and we all have minds. And the reason why I love hypnotherapy and what it is 95% of our mind is unconscious. And when we speak, we generally use 5% of our mind, which is conscious. So it's our wishes, our desires, our needs mind. It's our planning mind. It's our creative mind. And then we've got this massive bank of mind, which is 95%. And that is the feeling mind. And that's where we store our emotions, our feelings, and really importantly, the interpretation of every single thing that's happened to us since we were conceived. So what's interesting about that is, as a hypnotherapist, is we are always striving to find the root cause of our problems. And like talk therapy, that's the route we're heading towards, the unconscious mind. And hypnotherapy is about, I call it a heat-seeking missile, because we can deliberately focus and target the unconscious mind, and sometimes the preconscious mind. And what we're doing is we're basically tapping into a bank of information. The unconscious mind stores everything like snapshots. Shall we imagine it like photographs? Everything since we were conceived is stored there in a photograph. And the beauty about hypnotherapy is we can simply put a client into a relaxed or focused state of mind, which is nothing weird or woo actually, because we do go into hypnosis ourselves every day. Imagine driving home and you can't remember. I'm sure you've done that journey. You go, how did I get home?
God, on the way to this studio, what happened?
Yeah.
So one thing that strikes me, you say from the minute we're conceived.
Yes.
That to me sounds strange.
Yes, it is strange because it's pre-verbal. But our nervous system is accruing information constantly since we're conceived. So we experience things through feelings, emotions, and then once we come into becoming more conscious verbally, but we store all that information in our nervous systems through responses, fear, love, hate, all of those emotions are stored. So in answer to your question, what is hypnotherapy? Hypnotherapy is a deliberate tapping into the unconscious mind to look for the root cause, the origin for an emotional or sometimes a physical difficulty, because hypnotherapy is used in palliative care for pain and all sorts of other issues. So how do we utilize it is the next question, I suppose. We put somebody into a focused state of mind, and when they're in that focused state of mind, they're more open to suggestion. They're more open to changes. And when we have the blocks taken away, when we have that rigidity of the conscious mind asked to step aside for a minute, we recall memories and scenes. And that's what I'm after as a hypnotherapist. I want to know, what is that memory? What is that scene was the most pivotal, transformative, usually in a negative sense, that you began, should we say, for argument's sake, to believe that you weren't lovable? And the mind knows that moment as a child, and generally it's as a childhood experience, when you first began to experience that feeling of being unlovable. So while we're working with the unconscious mind, we get that moment. And it could be many, many more moments, but there's always a pivotal first ever experience of beginning to feel unlovable. And so the job then is to actually instruct the mind that I'm not that 4-year-old or that 5-year-old anymore, because our brain doesn't know the difference between the past, the present, or the future. It simply runs belief systems, runs thought patterns over and over and over again until we decide to make it a change. So the difference between, for instance, talk therapy and hypnotherapy is, with talk therapy, we talk around the issues, we talk the stories, we talk into it. And we obviously hope that we're going to find the origin of our issues, because they're generally from the emotional perspective. With hypnotherapy, we kind of short circuit it slightly. So we can go directly to the unconscious mind, find what the unconscious trigger is, or stimulus, emotion, feeling, event. And that's when we start to make the magic happen, because that's when we begin to instruct the brain of the changes. That belief system that you acquired, it's outdated for a start, and so we want to install a new belief system. And I suppose to simply put it, Laura, is our brain, if we look at it like it's a computer and we're running a program, if we don't update the hard drive in a computer, eventually it goes wonky and it doesn't work anymore. And it's the same in our brains. So I say that hypnotherapy is a bit like a rewiring and upgrading of the hard drive in our minds. We have an outdated belief, we have an outdated behavior, we may have addiction problems, we may have emotional issues, and we can have physical issues, because we do know that it's not compartmentalized, the body. We're all our systems are interlinked. And what we think and what we visualize have a corresponding effect in the nervous system. So if we upgrade what we think, if we transform what we believe in, and if we create better imagery in our minds, it stands to reason that our emotional state, our mental health will follow suit. So hypnotherapy, I'm so passionate about hypnotherapy. I trained in talk therapy many moons ago, when I was too young to actually train in talk therapy. And for me, it is like an avant-garde way of working. And people say to me, well, are you any good, or is it any good? Is it effective? The stats I look at are that talk therapy generally has a third, which is a third people do really well, a third of people stay the same, a third people get better. And I would say, from my personal professional experience, I would have a success rate, I would say somewhere between 65 and 70% with my clients. Okay. So it is, and it takes skill. It's like anything. You can have really good hypnotherapists, you can have not so good hypnotherapists, you can have really good talk therapists, you can not have. So that's it in a nutshell. It's working with the unconscious mind. Is it dangerous? I would imagine that any therapy is dangerous in the wrong hands. Do you need to be a particular type to be a good person for hypnotherapy? Yes.
As in a good person
a good candidate,
for it. Okay.
For it, yeah. And the brain doesn't like to change, and this is the difficulty. So,
well, what I find the most interesting thing that you just said there was, the brain doesn't know the past, the present, the future. It just keeps going around doing the same thing, which is why I suppose people repeat patterns of a lot of things that they may not want to, because their brain is wired that way.
And they've got beliefs that reinforce that from earlier life. Before the age of about 7, we're, as humans, in what we call theta mode. It's before we become actually conscious. It's before we can decide is something good or bad or wrong or right or actually helpful for us. And at the same time, in that period, we are wired to connect to our primary caregivers, be it parents or foster parents, whatever our circumstance. We're wired to stay with them because it's a primordial instinct to survive. So if the parenting isn't good enough, or if it's negligent, or it's not meeting our needs, we start to form belief systems about ourselves and the world. Now, people say, well, I had a great childhood, there's nothing wrong with me. Even perfect parenting creates belief systems that can hurt us. So our job as therapists and hypnotherapists is to rewrite that belief, rewrite the program, so to speak. And it's anachronistic, what means the brain is dealing with the past all the time. It's just running on that program. So with hypnotherapy, once we find out what the pivotal memory is, what the offending event, so to speak, is, the first thing we start to do, have the client say out loud with vehemence is, that's not me anymore. I'm not that 4-year-old little girl anymore. I'm not that little girl in that schoolyard standing outside of the group wanting to join with everybody being horrible to me. I'm a fully fledged 45-year-old woman now. I can meet my own needs. So we're changing that belief. We're changing the internal connection to the event. Now, I'll go back to whether people are a good candidate or is it suitable for everybody in a minute. The other part we need to know about when we're working with the unconscious mind is that the human brain only learns by repetition. That's how we get bad about stuff. That's how we get bad habits. We do it over and over and over and over again. So with hypnotherapy, we need to install a new belief, a new pattern of behavior. And so how we do that in the way I work is towards the end of my client's appointment with me, when we've done all that really important work in the unconscious mind, turning things on its head and having the brain believe that I'm not that hopeless, helpless child anymore. Then I record a bespoke audio for each client and they take it away. I usually WhatsApp them over nowadays. I used to email them and do all sorts of stuff. Now they get them WhatsApped and they listen to that audio twice a day, every single day.
How long is that audio?
For 28 days. About 20 minutes.
Okay.
So what we're doing is we're continuing to address the issue from the unconscious perspective twice a day for about a month. And the reason being is we know through neuroscience and neuroplasticity that it takes about a month to begin, and begin is an important word, to begin to make changes in the brain, to change the neural circuitry. It takes about 6 months to fully entrench a new pattern of behavior or a new belief or new feelings about ourselves. However, in that 1 month, we can completely start to bring the trajectory of somebody's emotions or patterns or whatever it is we're working on forward. And after that 1 month listening, the client is starting to have changes and starting to, maybe they have, they fall back a little bit and then they come forward again. But what's happening is we are addressing the issue from the unconscious perspective, because in the audio, I count the client into hypnosis. So they must be sitting or lying to listen to it. And the joy and the beauty about it, Laura, is that audio is very positive. It's all the difficulties that we found out during the one-to-one session turned on its head. So for the little girl who wasn't lovable, we have her, believing that she is entirely lovable. She was created lovable. Everything about her is actually the way it should be and the way it was supposed to be. And that she can look around the world and see and receive the sense that she belongs, that she counts, she matters, that she's an important human being. So what we're doing is we're feeding the unconscious mind with positive, reinforcing information. And people say to me, but isn't that just doing a meditation? Isn't that just listening?
Or affirmations or manifest? Is that manifesting even?
Well,
maybe not.
Part
you manifest something, don't you?
You do manifesting. The answer to that is, yes, it's the same. But we're not just using our conscious brain, the 5%. Because you're going into hypnosis and I count you into hypnosis, you're in that special place, in the feeling mind, and you're addressing the feelings in the feeling mind. So it has an exponentially transformative effect because of that. And
can I just ask you, the way we all think of hypnotists as these people that have people going on stage and walking like a rabbit, and that, is that real? Or
if I had a penny for it, every time I'm asked that, I still love answering it.
I'm interested in the answer, actually, because the first thing that came to mind. I'm really
interested, because the thing, when I first started doing hypnotherapy, when I trained 7 years ago, I had so many people going, oh, clucking like a chicken, all of the stories. If I could, I would actually abolish stage hypnotherapy. And I know it sounds a real killjoy thing, because it is good fun. However, it takes away from what is a very, very, very successful therapy. So for me, having worked at it full-time 7 years, I would rather I didn't have to have people's minds think it's fluffy or fringy or woo-woo, because it is entirely based in neuroplasticity and neuroscience.
Okay.
Not a lot of studies are done, but there's some I shared with you actually that are there. So basically, yes, the stage hypnosis is real. But what you don't know is what happens behind the scenes is the hypnotist might have 60 people who are dying to go on stage. And he'll give them all an exercise to do, and he'll watch the ones who are more suggestible.
Okay.
The ones who are more up for it. And that goes back to initially what I wanted to say about, is everybody a good fit for hypnotherapy? No is the answer. Because your mind responds to the words you say and the pictures you form in your head. We said that earlier. So we need people who are saying, I am ready to do this work. I am so invested in changing my mind and changing my belief systems. I am super ready to do it. Because if you remember, your brain doesn't like change. It doesn't want to change. So we have to kickstart that change by being determined, by being ready, and being really on it, because your brain actually changes chemistry by how determined you are or not. And the quickest way I can describe it to you is, imagine I rang you up and I said, hey, Laura, it's my birthday. Do you want to go to that new wine bar and we'll have a lovely night? You're not really going to come because it's not exciting. But if I ring you up and I go, hey, it's my birthday. Come on, it's Friday. That wine we've been looking for is in. You're definitely coming.
Yeah.
So that's the same with the mind. We've got to excite the mind to change. And so the language I use as a hypnotherapist is very powerful. It's evocative. It creates images. And it's exciting because we need to excite the mind to change. And the brain loves words like phenomenal, powerful, extraordinary, because it creates an image. So I deliberately use language that is very, very powerful so that we kickstart the brain into making those changes. And then we continue the work through that hypnosis audio constantly every day for about a month.
Okay. So how do the likes of psychiatrists view the work that you do? You know, the way they would obviously see people that have mental issues, or doctors in general that might be looking after people. And with the therapy that you do and the fact that you can actually probably, I don't know, maybe I'm overstepping the mark by saying you can maybe deal with someone's trauma in a much more positive way than maybe just medicating them or something like that. How is it viewed in those circles? Or
it's an interesting question. At the moment, I have two GPs who refer. I have had a palliative care doctor in Dublin refer a client to me. I've had a cardiologist. They're only ones, but it's a start. And I had a psychiatrist in the south of the country referring to me. Okay. So it's a start. I mean, hypnotherapy is definitely considered, on the outskirts of the therapy world. And it isn't, the training for it is not as long as it would be, for instance, for psychotherapy. And I think that's where it somehow comes into that, it's not regulated, it's not in that area. And I totally respect that. And I can understand why people would have that view of it. However, my experience, having been at it for 7 years, is I have worked with people, and I suppose I had training before as well. I have worked with people who have had some very, very, very difficult conditions, and they have been sent because modern medicine or therapy hadn't worked. Okay. I generally receive people after they've tried everything. Okay. Which is okay too, and I'm totally open to that. And but it wouldn't be the first port of call. But however, it is starting to be. I'm working with. I have 4 oncology patients who want me to help them with their chemotherapy side effects, who want to have their belief in themselves and their self-esteem, looked after while they're going through the most horrific experience that they can do. So they're the sort of areas I get called into. And a lot of people have heard about my life and the amount of trauma I've experienced. And that does create a certain level of trust, that people can say, okay, this lady has been through this. So my answer is, I think it's starting to get there. I have had very real and great conversations with GPs and, people who wouldn't generally, I would imagine, invite a client or a patient to go to
hypnotherapy? I think that the medical profession are much more open to all kinds of therapies now, even with integrative medicine and things like that, because I think people are asking questions, and there can't be just hard and fast rules for everyone because we're all so unique. I did a hypnobirthing when I was pregnant on my first, but so I tried a little bit of it, but anyone that listens here will know I like yoga, which means actually I did some yoga before I met you today. I just, with everything that's going on in the world at the minute, I'm just finding it difficult to I'm actually finding it very difficult to focus on just day to day, because I just keep thinking of all those poor people in the Middle East that are going through so much trauma. But I want to talk to you about a number of things, and I want to get it right, because we could talk all day. First of all, I'd like to discuss, because you mentioned it, neuroplasticity and what that means, and then I'd like to talk to you about how you got into this whole thing. And I know you could spend hours telling your story, so it'll be an interesting. I think it'll be interesting if you synopsize it for people.
Yeah, I will. I'll try.
So maybe just discuss neuroplasticity first, anyway, please.
Sure. Well, I can't remember how long ago. I think about up until 40 years ago, they thought the brain, once it was formed, it didn't change. And basically, an old dog, new tricks story. Once you'd got your patterns, that was it, and nothing could change. And then this whole science of neuroplasticity opened up, which found out that actually our brains, once formed, can change. And we have neural circuitry running in our brains, which are links between areas in the brain. We thought before that they didn't change. Now they know through an injury like a stroke or something that we can actually rewire around a stroke and we can heal. Not always, but that's the sort of thing. We can also change patterns of behavior because we know that this neural circuitry can be rewired or got around, and it can be changed. And so for my profession, what we're looking at is, say, for instance, that belief that little girl had, I'm not lovable. That's a belief which has a neural circuitry, right? So our job is not to get rid of that. It's to form another neural circuitry, which is I am lovable. And how we form that is by repetition. When we repeat an action over and over and over again, like going to the gym or something like that, we get better, it gets stronger, the muscle. And the same in the mind. The more we repeat a pattern, the stronger it gets. And so what we want to do is we want to have better beliefs, better suggestions, and basically we're forming new neural circuitry when we say, I am lovable, and we repeat it over and over again.
Okay.
It changes how the brain is wired. So the brain is malleable, it's plastic, it changes. That's it in a nutshell from the hypnotherapy side of it. From the neuroscience side of it, you'd need a neuroscience to do all of the major stuff, but that's where we're tapping into that bit. The brain's ability to change and rewire. We're hopping on that and we're utilizing it to our benefit. Okay.
Actually, one other thing. You said that even perfect parenting can cause, was it trauma? Or was it?
Well, perfect parenting can cause difficulties.
Oh, difficult.
Yeah.
Okay. So, how so?
I know, it's such an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think sometimes I think it's impossible to be a perfect parent, but like if you have the best type of upbringing, I suppose. But maybe that's that pattern that you think you've had the best type of upbringing, but maybe you haven't.
That's often the case.
Oh my goodness, we're all going to be traumatized after this podcast.
We might be.
So how can it cause difficulties? Is it just that it sets the bar too high sometimes? Or?
Yes, we can have the bar set too high. We can have no strife, no struggle.
Oh yeah.
All the needs met. What do they call it? Helicopter parenting.
Okay.
Spoon feeding, and I don't mean quite literally, but all needs met. That stops the child from having to strive to overcome difficulties. So when they go out into the world and they face challenges, they're not set up for overcoming difficulties. And I often see that because it's not always the trauma that you'd expect.
Yeah.
It can be the house where, don't worry about that, I'll do that for you. Don't worry about that, that's sorted. That person is not set up for, actually, funny enough, relationships as well.
Okay.
And when we don't see our parents fight and struggle to resolve conflict because we want to give our children the idea that we live in a perfect family, that can create huge difficulties and I work enormously with women in this area, in relationship areas and expectations around relationships. And they said, but my parents never fought. there you go. That's when we have difficulties with expressing ourselves, knowing what our needs are.
Because you learned not to be confrontational in a relationship because, you don't want to upset people. Therefore, when you go into a relationship yourself and maybe your partner wants to thrash something out, you feel, I suppose attacked or something like that.
Yeah, well, also a lot of people who've come from that particular type of parenting can believe that when there's conflict in a relationship, that it's a failed relationship. They don't understand that we need to have conflict resolution and work through what are our needs, what's my love language, what's your love language, what are your needs, and how we create this bond of language in the interdependent part of us, which is there's Rachel and my partner's called Malcolm. There's Malcolm, and it's only the bit that we join up, which is the interdependent part of the relationship that we work on. So there's lots and lots of work to do. And that's why I love hypnotherapy, because I can literally put a client into hypnosis and say, where did that begin? And you go right back to, there was the uneasy feeling in the house. I remember it, and that made me feel uncomfortable when there was any, silence or whatever. And then we can rewrite over it. We can overwrite the program.
That's very interesting. Now, let's get on to you. Let's give us a whistle-stop tour as to how you got to where you are today, because it's an interesting story. First, on so many levels, there's a serious amount of trauma that went on, but then also how you overcame that, particularly addiction through no fault of your own.
Accidental addiction
to prescriptive medication, isn't that right?
Yes.
So yeah, I'd love to get into that, Rachel.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours now. I'll shut up.
How long have you got?
Well, I know. I'll interject and I'll send us on a different route if I think we're going too deep into one topic.
Make a joke, Laura.
I will, of course.
Make some joke, because it's hefty stuff.
Yeah.
So, and also I tell it very lightly, and I always try and explain. I tell it lightly because I'm in the place that I am now.
Of course.
But just know that I also, there's a depth to this. But if we got really deep into it, we probably wouldn't be able to give our message for today.
Of course.
So basically, I'm almost faltering here and going, where do I begin? So for 7 years, I've worked as a hypnotherapist. Just over 7 years ago, I walked back into life, quite literally, having been absent from it for about 15, 16, 17 years. And I can only describe it as I came back into life like a Martian who'd been on Mars and had suddenly come back down to Earth, because in those years I experienced multiple traumas, multiple losses that quite simply took everything that I was becoming away internally. I mean, I don't talk about my childhood very often, but I will just say that it was an extremely challenging childhood. So I began life, should we say, in a deficit of confidence and self-esteem. And by the time I was 17, 18, I was having nervous breakdowns quite frequently. But I was in that unconscious phase. So I was just living life, and I used alcohol, I used cigarettes, I did everything somebody shouldn't do. So I was absolutely no saint. And I talk about this a little bit in my book, Flying on the Inside. So the real story begins when Dominic, who was my closest brother, we were like Irish twins, there was only a year between us, came back from the Caribbean, and he wasn't well, and he basically got diagnosed with bowel cancer very, very young, at the age of 26. And this was a massive shock, a massive shock for me and him, because we had survived a lot together. We fought like siblings, but we had this serious deep bond. And even though we didn't live in the same countries, we still had this sort of codependency, I would say. And wherever he went mentally, I kind of went, and I was more dependent on him than me. So when he got cancer, it was an extreme shock. I actually had started my first business at 23 at a restaurant. And I basically made a pact that I was going to look after him. And his condition was quite serious, and he did not want to be that young man with a colostomy. He did not want to lose body parts. So he decided that he would go the alternative route. And I hate using the word alternative, but he decided he would not have conventional treatment. And so what happened was we traveled the world together looking for a cure. And sadly, it did not work. And he died at 28 with me. Yes. And I'd nursed him for a couple of years. And so do you
know why he didn't want to go the conventional route?
We had a very alternative upbringing. And I think that...
Do you want to go into that at all? No?
It's something I don't tend to do because I want to respect my family.
Okay.
And, you know, I feel that I can tell my story, but I don't want to tell somebody else's story.
I understand.
But we had quite an alternative upbringing, and we were some of the first people that, ate organic food. We had an unusual kind of life. We grew our own food. We were self-sustaining. And I think some of that had it. But I think most of all, it was his pride.
Okay.
He did not want to lose. He was a young man, a young fit man, and I think he would have done anything rather than lose body parts. And that it was very advanced by the time he was diagnosed.
Okay.
So that was the reason, my take on it anyway. So sadly, when he died, I was absolutely bereft, but I was traumatized because I looked after him and I didn't realize I was traumatized. It was a very, very serious situation that I, at 26, was in. And, I was managing his morphine pump and I was there during the nights. It was quite an undertaking for a young girl. And what happened was he died, and I had met a fantastic man a year before Dominic died. He was a bit older than me and we got on beautifully, and he was a gorgeous, gorgeous man. And we formed a solid relationship.
I love that, a gorgeous man. I love an old gorgeous man.
He was a gorgeous man.
I'm a gorgeous man myself.
Well, he was a gorgeous man. He came off a boat from the sea, and it was just,
Did
it was
he
a lovely romantic
boat?
story. He did. He came
love.
off a boat, and we lived on a boat at one point. So yeah, he was great. Nick was great. And he was kind of the counteract almost to Dominic dying. And we got married a year after Dominic died, and there's another story there, but we haven't got time for that. And I was pregnant 3 months later, and although it was a bit of a shock, I was ready for it. And, it was just fabulous, and I was very excited, and we were excited. And anyway, to cut it short, 8 months later, Nick was dead. And
when you was newborn?
Nicola wasn't born, I was 6 months pregnant. So we got married in December and he was dead by July.
How did he die?
He drowned in a terrible diving accident. We had a scuba diving business, and we took recreational divers out to wrecks off the West Cork coast. And he had a new bit of equipment, and I wasn't diving because I was pregnant. And he basically came to me and he said, it was gorgeous evening. I'll never forget it. It was one of those, when Ireland really shines up.
Oh yeah.
One of those gorgeous July nights.
Pink skies and all the rest.
It's divine. And Nick said to me, look, I want to dive. Would you ever do the boat? And I wasn't planning to go on the boat because we had his 2 daughters down from another relationship, and they were going to a disco and I was going to help them get ready and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, I just turned around to him and said, you know what? I will. And I said to the girls, I'm going to take the dive out and I'll be back and then we'll carry on later. And he had a new bit of equipment that he was trialing, and it was very avant-garde. It was called a rebreather, which is basically, I don't know if you know anything about scuba diving, but normally you exhaust the bubbles. Everybody sees the bubbles. This one didn't have any bubbles. It had a computer, and it scrubbed out the carbon dioxide and replenished the mix of gases so that it was, normal breathing air, and it gave you long bottom time on deeper dive. And without going into all the details, he didn't come back. And I had 11 divers in the water when I knew that something terrible had happened. So
you took him out and a group of other people?
I had 11 other divers. He made the 12th because he dive in twos. And so it was a desperate situation where I had to call the helicopter. The lifeboat was launched. And the procedure is a procedure, even though I knew it was my husband and I had a tummy out to here. I managed to effect the rescue and make sure that all the other divers came on board. And once they were on board, they were able to support CPR and all the rest. But it was too late, and the chopper took him away. And I had then to go back to the harbour with my boat and then be driven to the hospital. And I won't ever forget the time when I walked into the hospital and I queued. I'm thinking, God, I must have been absolutely bombed to queue at the A&E. And I gave my name, and my brother was with me, and he just said, step out of the queue. And then I felt an arm on me, and it was a nurse. And I remember turning around to her and saying, "How is he?" And she just said, "He didn't make it, Rachel." And everything that I'd been through on the boat that evening, I wrote about it. It was like I split in two. And it's so interesting to me to look back. I carried on making sure that everyone was safe. I carried on with the rescue. I was on the radio talking to the lifeboat, and people who can listen in on VHF, and people told me years later that they listened in that night and they could not believe when they heard that it was my own husband. I literally was able to run a rescue operation and at the same time internally have another conversation. This is my husband. This is my husband. Next day. But I was operational, and it's so interesting about trauma and how we survive and how we can split ourselves and disassociate and be functional but not be functional at the same time, Laura. And when I tell this story now, I actually have such compassion for myself. I never used to do. I didn't understand that I should have had compassion. I was more kind of saying, well, I did it. I got everybody, but actually now as a postmenopausal woman, I look back on that young woman. I was 29. And I look back at that woman and I say, my God, girl, you just been through that loss. You just went through that loss and you carried on, So I had to do a lot of reconnecting in my own therapy, reconnecting to my own body, my own spirit, my own soul. And don't forget, I had a baby in my tummy and I had to give birth just over 3 months later. That was, I'm trying to find the words to describe it. That was a disconnected situation. And Nicola, my beautiful daughter, now is 25. I have spoken to her. We've spoken about this because I could not connect to that baby. I could not connect to the birth. I couldn't connect to any of it.
I was going to ask you, how was that whole thing? Yeah. How did that play out when you had the baby?
It was tough. There is that instinct, that, I saw a joke years ago. Thank God there's a mothering instinct, because if we didn't, we'd throw the baby out the window, isn't it? That.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Yeah. But sure, isn't that why we have all these hormones? And it's why they're so goddamn cute.
Yes.
And you know why teddy bears are cute? Because the teddy bears look like babies. They've the little faces and then they've the big bellies. That's why we love teddy bears. But if they weren't so gorgeous, we absolutely will, especially when they're whinging with the colic. Oh my goodness. But it's this thing that I was actually speaking about it the other day. The way you'd actually die from them. You go to jail for them. If they killed someone, you'd be like, I did it, okay, I'm going to go to jail for my kid. But they're absolute pains in the arse sometimes.
They are, thank you. They are really.
Yeah.
Nicola, hear this.
So you give birth and you have a baby, and you've the trauma of your husband having died in very traumatic conditions. How did you despair? Did you get counselling? How did you cope?
I tried everything. I drank a lot.
Did you?
Yeah, I drank a lot of wine. It was the only way I could feel anything. I felt like an unexploded bomb all the time, to be honest. I couldn't release the pressure in me. And the only way I could feel halfway normal was after a bottle of wine. So I would put Nicola to bed in the evening. Sorry, Nicola. And I would sit at the kitchen table. And it wasn't that I was drinking rapidly. I would just drink the wine and then I could feel. And then I could cry. Okay. And so
I had another lady on, maybe it was this time last year, was it? And she's a psychotherapist, and she had the same response to a trauma. It was alcohol, and it was that at night when her kids were in bed. It's interesting, isn't it?
Isn't that interesting? It was the only thing I could do.
That's self-medication though, isn't it? Really, because it's a drug. Alcohol is a drug.
It's a drug, and it removes. It's don't do this at home. It's that kind of thing. But it did remove that inability to tap into this horror I was living. And now, looking back, I now know I had complex PTSD. I had flashbacks, inability to sleep, sweating, inability to stay still, not able to stay in the present moment at any point in time, not able to remember stuff, inconsistency. It was written all over me. But in those days, this is 1999. In those days, nowadays people would say to me, are you okay? How are you coping? How is it? Maybe people did, but I didn't hear it. And I certainly didn't have, anyone in the professional realm coming to me and saying this, you may need help. So I helped myself in the way I knew. I had a therapist who probably hurt me more than helped me at that time. Probably not skilled enough in the area.
And actually, I've heard that a few times. Of friends who've used therapy on and off over the years, and some therapists have actually caused more damage and then put you off trying to seek for other therapy or giving you the wrong information. I was talking to someone the other day that said that there was they went to a therapist who, that was it. They went to a therapist who told them that they didn't believe that being a gay woman was a choice. They thought that being a gay woman was a choice, that a man had to have hurt you in the past for you to be a gay woman. And this was a woman who had just discovered she was gay in later life. And the therapist told her this. So, and if she hadn't been a strong woman, it would have done irreparable damage to her. But she knew that this was a bit of a red flag. So it is interesting
100%, yeah. And that is interesting. That lady had, and I'm sure there are many more well-intentioned, of course. I think what I needed, if it were me now, if I was able to prescribe for me now, I would have somebody say to me, this is what you're experiencing. This is what you're likely to experience. This is normal as a result of what you've been through. What you need is physical touch. You need somebody to be there, and you need somebody to be responsive when you somehow know what you need in any moment. I mean, I know that would be phenomenal.
What does that look like then? Does that person exist unless it's a partner
probably
and you
not.
just lost yours? So.
Yeah, probably not.
Okay.
But if I had been told that you're actually quite sick right now, it would have helped.
Okay.
Because I didn't know there were labels for what I was feeling. I didn't know that these flashbacks were abnormal. I just said, I'm living with a video all the time in my head. Nobody said a video in your head all the time, because nobody knew then. But definitely physical touch would have been so helpful. Caring touch. My neighbours, my family were phenomenal, but nobody was reaching what I needed. And I only know that looking back, of course. I remember I went to one therapist and she said to me, I'm just going to shine a light on your difficulties. That's my job. And it horrified me, because I was living with my difficulties in kaleidoscopic colour 24/7 behind my eyes. So the skills that I needed were deep care, deep listening, deep holding. If somebody had have held my body, just held me while I spoke. But the thing about the therapy at the time particularly was they were standing behind a wall with transference and counter-transference. That was not healthy for me. That was not what I needed. What I needed was deep love and care, and somebody to hold my body, to stop it vibrating. I vibrated all the time. I felt as if I was shaking constantly.
And I say you were full of anger, were you?
No, and that's so interesting. Anger did not show up in my life until about 2 years ago.
All right. Are we going to fast forward to that? No.
You can if you want. I've done with it and dealt with it. It's okay, you're safe.
Okay. So when did you get over the trauma of your husband dying, or no?
I didn't get a chance, because when Nicola was about 3 and 4, I started to behave oddly, and I didn't take any notice of it because I was just so damn miserable, to be honest. So I started to drive on the wrong side of the road occasionally. You'd think it would twig with me, wouldn't you? Sometimes I'd jump into the car and my hand wouldn't go to the gear stick, just momentarily, and then it would be fine again. And I didn't even take any notice, Laura, when I started to lose the use of my left leg at night getting out of bed to Nicola. I'd crawl.
Okay.
And I think that I'd reached such a low ebb that I expected nothing good from life, and that life was always going to be a drudge. So I never said a blooming word until Nicola found me unconscious in the kitchen one morning.
How old was she?
She's about 5.
Okay.
So she got help. She got Grandma, and Grandma came over, and then the local GP came and called an ambulance, and I was sent to Cork Hospital. I lived in West Cork. And they diagnosed me with an AVM, which is an arterial venous malformation. It's a very big benign brain tumour. Well, not always. Mine was bloody large. It was a 6. They're graded from 1 to 6, and mine was a 6. So what happened then was a massive change again, because my life was in danger, and I was told there's no operation, it's too serious, and you need to basically sort your daughter out and write your will, because you will have a burst aneurysm at some point and there will be nothing we can do. It's catastrophic. So I went to lots of hospitals in Ireland and same answer. So I actually ended up going to England and touring hospitals in England. And I think I saw 6 neurology departments in 6 different hospitals in London. And they said, the same, would lacerate you. There's no surgery. It's too serious. And I was on medication at that time for epilepsy. I was on a drug called Epilum.
And was the epilepsy caused by the tumour?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, it was. And so basically they were medicating me and keeping an eye on my medication, but basically told, you've probably got about 2 years. And so I always say to people, don't ever give up, because, and I mean that strenuously, because I didn't, and I kept asking questions. And then a chance meeting of my sister-in-law's neighbour, blah, blah, went round, and somebody had heard of a surgeon in Bristol who was considered to be quite a maverick neurosurgeon. He took pretty hopeless cases on. So my scans were forwarded to him, and he wrote to me, and I'm so sorry I didn't keep that letter, because it basically said, "Dear Mrs. Gotto," very formally, "I have received your scans, and it looks like I may be able to operate, but you do need to know that if you do survive, you're likely to be paralysed down the left-hand side of your body for the rest of your days. Basically, write back to me, and, that's it." So I received this letter. I bloody well burnt it. And of course, I didn't have to think hard. I had a little girl, and I wanted to be alive, and I was willing to risk it. So in January, I went to Bristol, and I had a very, very, very long operation. Neurosurgery. It lasted about 15 hours. I had an intracranial bleed, which meant after surgery, I bled into my brain, and that caused all sorts of difficulties. But I'm sitting here today, so I survived. However,
And you're not paralysed on the left
not
side?
anymore.
Okay.
I was.
You were, okay.
I was. So 10 days after surgery, I was starting to become more aware of life again. And it was that day when I tried to turn over, and there was a sack of potatoes, I thought, sitting on. You'd have to be Irish to say a sack of potatoes,
I know, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you wouldn't say a sack of anything else. A sack of potatoes lying on my left side, and the horror of finding out. The nurse just ran to get the surgeon, and he came in and he said, "Mrs. Gotto," as he called me, he wouldn't call me Rachel, "we regret to inform you that you are paralysed down the left-hand side of your body, and we don't know if you'll walk again."
Okay.
Serious days again. So that was tough. Very tough.
And how did you start walking again then?
I was sent to a brain injury unit.
Okay.
Yeah, so I went to a rehabilitation unit, and over time I started to get the use of my leg back.
Okay.
It was pretty soon. It was within a month or so. I was wobbly and weak, and it wasn't great, and I had a very bad gait, but I basically trained my leg again. And my left arm and hand, it was my dominant hand. That was very difficult, because I had to immediately start to become right-handed. My left hand didn't move for a very, very long time. It was a couple of years before it started to move properly. And I still don't have much good use of my left hand. I can pick things up and hold a coffee cup and stuff, but I had to learn to write with my right hand. So, and at the same time, this is where the beginning of the dependency came, because I had serious brain injury. I had a lot of scarring in my brain, and my brain scans looked like a quarter of my brain was missing. It was just like a black hole. And I went back to Ireland, actually. I discharged myself from the brain injury unit because I was so homesick. I was so miserable there. And I just figured I'm never going to get well. So I actually left and went back to Ireland. And I was prescribed 6 drugs 4 times a day by the time I left, which were all valid and designed to keep my brain quiet, because you probably know after brain injury there's a lot of electrical firing going on and seizures. I was having up to 12 seizures a day, all types of seizures. So rightfully they added in loads and loads and loads of medication until I stopped seizing. So my brain was injured, and my brain was damped down with lots and lots of medication. So I lived like that for many, many years. I was alive. I was glad to be alive. I was pleased. I had no complaints. The only thing that started to happen was I started to become impulsive and compulsive. And I didn't know that at the time. I was very, very, very depressed. I was very, very, very anxious, and I could never sleep. And I spent all day asleep and awake all night. And I made some really crazy decisions in that period. Unbeknownst to myself, I was heavily medicated. And my brain wasn't capable of functioning like an adult brain. I was probably functioning maybe with the brain of a 14-year-old. They're my words. But I took Nicola to live in Italy on the spur of a moment. I met a guy online, you know.
Okay.
I did a lot of crazy things. I sold houses that I shouldn't have moved. I wasn't well enough to move.
Were you able to work during this time? How did you make a living?
No, I was very, very lucky that there was an insurance.
Okay.
I was very lucky. I was not fit to work. And I was very well supported by my mother and my brothers. You know, everybody was really good to me. However, I was still a grown-up woman. And I made crazy decisions. Nicola still maintains, actually, me taking her to Italy was a very good decision. It transformed how her life played out, actually.
Okay.
But looking back, I don't do a lot of shame. But looking back, I do cringe. And I think, holy cow, I was so blooming bombed off my head. I made a lot of bad decisions. And
was Nicola's life okay as a result? Or has she needed her own hypnotherapy then as well?
Yeah, she was suffering really badly because I wasn't present. I was completely absent mother in terms of emotionally absent. I wasn't able to connect. So she suffered from anxiety, and she had a lot of difficulties. And somehow we ambled our way through it. And our bond, I think, was forever going to be incredibly strong. But as a mother, I had failed her many times, and I've written about it, and I'm okay with it.
So interesting that you're saying that and so candidly saying it as well, because I think it's so difficult for women in particular to say, oh, look, I fucked up here, or I failed in my child. You know, we all strive to be the best we can, but
yeah.
Life does get in the way for a lot of us, and that's why when you're saying even about people will come to you and they may have had something from their childhood, and usually it's a parent or something, or you know, I think that I say to my husband, oh, you know, like when they're whole grown up, they'll probably blame us.
Yeah, they will.
When they're in counselling, they'll be blaming something we did, you know.
Absolutely.
And it's a desperate responsibility too, you know.
It is too.
And then I think with you mentioned helicopter parenting too. And God, we're also just striving to do our best, but at the end of the day, we can damage them in so many ways.
We're going to screw up, and I think that's what I decided was that I was going to be real about it and be vulnerable about it. And I think that Nicola would have a very difficult time with me if I'd have held the line of, well, I was just parenting. I had to be real to her.
Or like, oh, look, it was... I was drugged out of it, therefore, you know, it's not my fault. Yeah,
and to a certain degree, I know it wasn't. And I'm particularly kind to myself about it now. But in terms of what she went through, I have to be real with her that, yeah, it was shit.
Okay.
And yeah, I did some crazy things, and for that I'm sorry. And I had this running joke with her for years and years and years. I said, there are 12 sessions of psychotherapy in the bank for you whenever you want to come and claim them. And you know what? I think that was really refreshing, because I was saying, look, hands up. It was really mixed up for me. I did the best I could at the time, but I know I screwed up. And we can make this real. And I said to her also, if you ever want me to come into a therapy session with you, if you need to be real with me, I'm here to hear it, because we have a bond. I want to be here for you, and I want to be real for you, because the next generation is dependent on us girls getting it right. And that's another thing I talk about, is legacy to the next generation. And it takes vulnerability and reality to change legacies and inherited trauma and transgenerational trauma. And this is something I'm very passionate about, is making sure I don't hand my emotional difficulties to the next generation as best as I possibly can.
Yeah, that's actually very deep, because but like, even what's going on in the world at the minute, when you see the trauma that's going on in certain people's lives, how can that not filter down generation after generation?
It does. And it takes us as women to take that stand. On our parents' shoulders we stand, and our children stand on our shoulders. If we can do, I'm a great believer in reality, just being real. If we can be real at appropriate times, particularly as our children grow, I think that we're affecting change. We're healing them by giving them permission to come to us. And by opening the subject, by making it okay to say, that wasn't great. And that we don't stand behind that veneer of perfection or I'm a parent, so I must look as if I know everything. I don't know everything. You know, none of us do. And just because we're adults, we don't always know what's best. So to be open to that conversation, the real conversation, I think, is how we as women make sure that the same difficulties don't happen for the women that are coming after us. And I love to think like that. That is one thing that fires me up, is making sure that our daughters and sons stand on our shoulders with some form of change from the ones we stood on.
Yeah. Okay, back to the addiction.
But let's get back to basics. Okay, so I lived in Italy for a couple of years, and I was able to get my medication in Italy. And dutifully I took all my medication and never questioned it once. Until things started to really take a nosedive. I was starting to think about not being around. I was starting to think dark thoughts. And so I had no energy. I was incapable of doing anything at all. So I started to ask questions. I came back to Ireland. Nicola wasn't doing very well, so I came back to Ireland and I visited a new neurologist. I visited GPs. I visited lots and lots of different professionals. And my question was, am I as brain damaged as we first thought? Or is there something else going on? Because I am deteriorating. I'm not even staying stable. My emotional state is starting to get very, very serious. And the response from one neurologist who was in England said, look, we'll put you on an antidepressant. And I was kind of thinking, I'm already on 6 drugs 4 times a day. I don't think, how could that cut through?
Were they all seizure drugs? Okay.
And some were Lyrica, you know, clobazam, you know, Epilim.
All the good stuff, so
yeah. All the good stuff. On the heavy stuff. And I was on a couple of mood stabilizers.
You must have been quite sedated on all of them.
I couldn't think. I really could not think. Yeah. That's why but also at the same time I became compulsive. I started acting out abnormally for somebody of my age. I was not acting like a fully fledged woman, not even just traumatized woman. You know, just there was stuff I was doing was not right.
Okay.
And I kind of on one level knew that this was not right. There was a functional bit of me that kept saying,
well, when you're going asking them, are you sure that you're as damaged as
you're starting to wonder.
You're asking questions. Okay.
You're wondering. Unfortunately, the answer was, no, you have had a massive acquired brain injury. Basically, look at you. You need the medication to stay stable. And to me, that was totally acceptable. You know, I understood. I had a hole in my head, basically. But yet my mental state was deteriorating rapidly. So basically, I went to another neurologist and I took the whole gambit of the meds, and I put them out. And I said, right, this is what I'm taking. If you could find one culprit here, or just one drug that you think might be an issue, is there one you'd pick? And he tapped one of the boxes and he said, that one could be your issue.
Which one was that?
That was clobazam, which belongs to the class of drugs called benzodiazepines.
Yes.
And
not prescribed very much these days. It's considered to be one of the ones that, probably for the reason why you were ill with it, is because it's highly addictive, and then it's quite sedating too.
Yeah. And I'd been on it, I think, about 7-8 years at that point, unchanged in the dose. So I learned I was actually in a thing called tolerance withdrawal, where I wasn't getting enough of it, and I was constantly in withdrawal. So I was like somebody who was a drug addict, craving it in my cells, but there's no sort of psychological addiction with benzodiazepine. It's a physical dependency. So when I didn't take my drugs, I would shake, you know, and they were saying, you couldn't possibly. And I said, I feel so ill if I don't take it on time. So anyway, that tapping on that box, and I said, what do I do? And that neurologist said, just don't take it.
I know, now come on. Like as in, like just stop.
Mm-hmm. So
but they gave you a step down program, didn't they?
No, they didn't. And I stopped taking it. And I stopped taking it that night. I remember exactly the night because I'd called to a friend and stupidly, but she'd found a hedgehog and the hedgehog was covered in worms. And I went into withdrawal that night and I thought I'd worms in my mouth. I thought I'd beetles running around my wrist.
Just for anyone listening, okay, for anyone listening that is taking benzodiazepines or taking any kind of an antidepressant or any kind of drug that is affecting your mental state, you do not come off them like cold turkey. It is just the wrong thing to do. It's dangerous. And you get a step down program and you insist on one. You liaise with your GP, your psychiatrist, your pharmacist. I just have to say
Thank
that.
you. And you're absolutely right, because that's what happened to me.
But you know now, actually, sorry, and just to say to you, something came out there recently. I was looking at it in the Pharmaceutical Journal and I did a little bit of a talk on it. And they now have said that, so we take people off, and so someone might be put on an antidepressant, say it's a SSRI, and they thought that when, once they were stabilised and well and wanted to come off it or were advised to come off it, that they could come down off it over, say, like a 4-week period. So you half the dose, then you quarter the dose, and that's it. It's absolutely the wrong thing to do. We should actually be giving, if someone just say is on 50 milligrams of Lustril or sertraline, they should actually be withdrawn down to say 1 milligram a day eventually, but the tablets aren't made like that. No. The smallest tablet is 25 milligrams. Yeah. So in order to make it that minute an amount, we need to be actually giving liquid doses, but liquid doses are expensive. Yes. So now they're talking about actually teaching patients to take a tablet, add water to it and withdraw out an amount. That's and do that every day.
What I did.
Is it?
That's exactly how I learned.
But it's not the done thing, and it's not how people are. Like, no. I remember taking people off antidepressants, and you can only get so far. They're eventually taken, like, say, 3 times a week or twice a week. But
really difficult.
It's terrible because the half-life doesn't last that long. So you did that way.
I did. I used, because actually I had that cold turkey experience. And that nearly killed me, quite frankly. Yeah. So what I knew, again, that little bit of functional part of my brain, I took it again. Okay. And I reverted back. So I understood then. I had information. So I started to Google, and I actually had zero help in the real world, because they said, just cut it in quarter. And so I found a forum called Benzo Buddies. And they had tables.
Sounds like a deadly forum.
I know.
I want to join.
I want to join that gang. Well, they were the only people who'd cut tables. So it's interesting because there was only one person who'd done any form of a study on benzos, and her name was Professor Heather Ashton. And she was a pharmacological professor in England.
I know her.
You know her. Mm. So she was the first person to actually at least have a look at benzos, and she cut tables, but they were so she was kind of going around 10-15% of your daily dose in terms of withdrawal, every 2 weeks. I started off with her withdrawal tables, and if you want me to describe how it was inhumane what I was experiencing. So in Benzo Buddies, see, because it was experiential, they had reduced that reduction down to between 1% and 2% of your daily dose every 2 weeks.
But you see, the thing about that is it's not licensed. So the pharma company licenses so it's not licensed. So you're doing it off license, and then there's the whole who's liable there. It's very tricky.
I think in the Netherlands now, they actually cut the dose for you. They give you the packages.
They give you.
Well, that's true. You can get anything there. I'm trying to go the other way though. I know. I don't want any of those anymore.
I know.
So basically, I cut my own tables, and I had a community of people who were going through the same horrific experience. And believe me, anyone who's listening, having been on it so long, I was very physically dependent on it. The psychological and the emotional and the physical response to my withdrawal, and I can only speak about my withdrawal, nearly took my life. It was that serious. It took me 2.5 years to come off. I crossed over to Valium because it has a longer half-life. Mm-hmm. And so it took me 2.5 years to come off 15 milligrams of Valium. And I had seizures in that mix. And the only way I managed it was this community of people who I belonged to, because we were underworld people. Nobody believed that my symptoms could be as severe as they were. And in my horror, it was fed back to me by a medical person that I couldn't possibly be going through withdrawal because it couldn't possibly be that bad. And actually it was underlying psychological disorder that I had. That dishonouring my experience, like it's the only word I can say.
It wasn't a psychiatrist that said that to you, was it?
No, it wasn't said to me. It was said to a family member and then fed to me. It was a medical person. I'd rather be a bit anonymous about it. That dishonouring my experience was probably the most hurtful thing that's ever happened to me in my life, because I was battling to stay alive. I was battling every single moment of the day to stay alive and go through this withdrawal process with no support from any quarter, only an underworld support.
Why did
online.
you want so much to come off it if it was so bad going through the withdrawal? What was making you... Because that in and of itself, I'm just wondering, what was the reason why?
What was I looking for?
Yeah.
I wanted to live a different life.
Okay.
And I wanted to be a mum I knew I could be.
Okay.
I knew I could be somebody else, but I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't know how it was going to be. I just had a part of me that knew this was not right.
And it took over 15 years of your life?
Well, but I'm saying between Dominic and getting to the end of the program of withdrawal of benzodiazepines was from when I was 29 and, oh God, until I was nearly 45 or something.
Okay.
So all those years I was drugged up. I wasn't a functional person. All those years it kind of concertinaed into kind of a mess. But don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful I'm alive, and modern medicine I am totally believing in it, without that surgery. But it was the mistake, and it was a mistake. But those mistakes have happened to other people. And so that's why I do like to talk about prescription drug dependency, because it's not the same as drug addiction where there's a psychological draw to take the drug. It's actually dangerous to cold turkey off drugs we're physically dependent on. We can have seizures, we can stop breathing, we can die. So that's something that I think is such an important thing for people to know, is that don't ever stop taking anything until you understand it. And that comes to what we were talking about, was advocacy, self-advocacy and agency over our lives. I don't think it's okay not to understand what you're taking anymore. I blithely took everything, but I wish now I'd have researched it way back. I might have asked questions earlier and maybe suffered less. I think it is important nowadays, because we have access to the information and because we are the wonderful people that we are, that we have education and we have freedom and we have knowledge, that it's not okay just to hand our care over to somebody. We wouldn't hand our car over to a painter. We go to a mechanic and we ask questions and we want to know how is our car and what are we paying for. I think we should be the same with our own health care. That's my feeling now. And I certainly...
Do you think there's a resistance though in the medical community to people who ask questions, or do you think that it's just that we've been brought up in a society where we're used to being told, you take this drug and you do it for this, and I know more than you do? Do you think it's a mix of it, or do you think we're changing? Like, certainly I know that there's less, I suppose, people are probably more willing to change to another doctor if they're not really getting what they want from the current doctor. And doctors can only know so much too, and with everything, with modern medicine the way it is, I'm sure it's very tricky to know all things about everything. But do you think that patients lack advocacy for themselves?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it could be very annoying and difficult if people who don't understand stuff start researching and Googling it and come up with all sorts of X, Y, Z. That is difficult for doctors, and then they're dealing with, all sorts of misinformation and stuff like that. And I think there's a bit still left in us that, we like to be cared for. We like to not have to worry. And then there's the old thing, the doctor and the priest always knew better. I think there's a good bit of...
The priest is definitely gone, I think, right?
I think we
maybe
can safely
the view with the doctor's still there.
He might not be on that pedestal anymore. But I think that there's a bit of everything in all of us. But I think that now is the time for all of us to treat each other as fully functioning, intelligent human beings. We all have access to the same information. And yes, we can all come up with common denominators which are incorrect, whatever. But what I'm saying is if you're going to be putting your care into somebody's hands, at the very least research that person And at the very really least, understand a little bit about what you're likely to receive and just generally around your condition. I don't think it's okay anymore to just say, I don't want to know, because mistakes do happen, as happened to me. And I think that we should honour ourselves and honour our lives and honour our bodies by being as curious and interested in ourselves and having agency over what we allow ourselves to go through. And it doesn't mean to say we have to become an expert in it, but just do some research and find some level of understanding about what you're going through. I do think anyway.
So how did you get into the hypnotherapy then? Was it after this and once you came off the... Are you still on the other medications?
I'm not on any medication.
What? You came off it all? How?
Yeah, slowly. Just slowly.
And you don't have any seizures?
I'm completely fine.
And have they done any scans of your brain?
EEGs, I've had head MRIs.
And what have they said to you?
They said it's basically you still have scar tissue, but everything's settled down. And
so you didn't just come off the clozapam?
I came off the lot in the end.
At the same time?
No.
Okay.
No, I that took me a very, very long time because I was on Lyrica. That was the next one I tackled. And that was hard. Talking about anger outbursts, that was a nasty drug to come off.
It's a difficult
vicious
drug. They sell it on the streets now. It's very...
Do they?
Yeah.
It's a nasty thing. I went off them one by one. I had a gap of months between each withdrawal. And
obviously this was with your doctor's advice, was it? Or did you
we kind of clubbed it together. I have a great GP.
Okay.
She's a marvellous woman and we work well together.
Okay.
And she said, look, I'm not sure about this. And I said, well, how about we do it really, 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 really slowly and we have gaps between each withdrawal to let the body settle. And that's how we did it, really. Okay. Just slowly. So
listen, guys, it's always with your doctor's advice. Don't be coming off any drugs without your doctor knowing.
Do not. And really I totally agree.
Yeah.
Because, this is chemistry. This is your body, your physiology, and it kicks back. So you need to do everything really slowly and with supervision, if at all possible. I didn't have that choice. My coming off benzodiazepines was done safer by my own route than it would have been because I was going to be told way too quick.
And it's also the thing is as well is that with all the pressure on the healthcare system, people, they can't get that kind of level of care, I don't think either, where they would need to be constantly checking in and doing that tapering as well. Like there's so many issues to it. I
always thought, I had a great pharmacist, funny enough, down in West Cork, and I told him what I was doing. Now he was really on it.
Oh yeah, we love that kind of thing.
Yeah, he knew what I was going through, and he was quite happy to sort out prescriptions, whatever. And he would even say to me, "How is it?" And I was able to say to him, "I'm in dire straits," And he'd say, "You're doing good. You're going." I'd nobody to tell me I was doing well. I'd nobody to tell me you're going to get there, apart from my underworld friends.
Underworld.
Yeah.
I've written out charts for people on how to come off, but again, it is tricky because if we could get down to the doses that we should be, which is the 1 milligram a day, we need to be putting a tablet into water and withdrawing.
I use vodka. Vodka keeps it in solution better.
Well, the thing is that if you do it every day and you're down to like that small an amount, you're supposed to discard the drug because you can't. It's not stable.
You take off what you need and then you discard
throw it
the
out.
rest.
Yeah. So are you saying that when you put it into vodka, you're able to keep it on to the next day? You tight,
no.
tight woman. All right, you just put it into vodka because
it was in better solution.
Oh my goodness, that's gas. See, I'm learning something now too. I get in trouble now advising people to melt down their drugs in vodka.
You didn't hear it here.
No. So let's fast forward. So you're off all your drugs then, and you decided that you wanted to do something.
Yeah, well, it was like a stumble. Have you seen those comedies where somebody stumbles on stage? I kind of stumbled back into life, and in the period I was withdrawing, I didn't leave my house for 2.5 years. I had agoraphobia, couldn't leave my house. So I was quite literally needing to learn how to be life again. I needed to learn how to be a mum who went to the school gates again. And so I had to upskill my social skills. I had no friends. Everybody had gone. That 2.5 years were vicious, horrific. I lost my mind. I was insane. I had a psychotic break. I was not well. And so I had to rebuild everything from the bottom up. And I wrote in my book about being in town and standing next to two women who were chatting and pretending to window shop to watch how people chat, because I didn't know how to do it anymore. And so I grew my life from the bottom up, from the sticks up. And that took a while. And it was actually when I was really starting to gain traction. I was in therapy. I've been in therapy all my life, practically. And I still am. Various different types of therapy, and I range between talk therapy, hypnotherapy, all sorts, because I actually love it and I think it's valid. But I was with a psychologist at that time, German lady. She was brilliant. She really supported me insofar as she understood I needed to rebuild my life. And she wasn't standing behind a veneer, we were doing think tank stuff. You could do this next week. You could try this, And so when I built myself up again, I wanted to then. I had almost trained in acupuncture. I'd almost trained in naturopathic nutrition. I'd almost trained in psychotherapy. I'd all of these almosts behind me because another tragedy would hit me and I'd just be sent scattering again. And then I remembered that I had a terrible fear of anesthesia, and I mean pathological terror of anesthesia. So to have the brain op I had, I needed to overcome it. And I'd forgotten that I'd actually gone to a hypnotherapist and overnight got rid of my pathological fear of anesthesia. So I remembered that. And then somebody said to me, have you heard about hypnotherapy, blah, blah, blah. And it just suddenly clicked. And I said, that's what I want to do. I've rewired my body. My body's moving again. My brain is healing. It's neuroplastic. I realize I'm making new neural circuitry. My brain was so damaged from brain injury, from surgery, and from drug dependency, but yet it was healing. So then I got really fascinated because I thought, can I heal my emotions? Can I heal the trauma? Can I heal all of this stuff that's stuck inside me that's been like a bottleneck? And I found that I could.
And now look at you, fully healed.
Well, broken healed. How's that?
Are any of us ever? Look at you in front.
Veneer of perfection.
Now you are absolutely. If anyone could see you now,
not a bother.
Perfect. But that is wonderful, and now you're helping other people with what you have learned.
Yeah, and I love it. I'm passionate about it.
And what's your book called again?
Flying on the Inside.
When did you write that?
1819. It was published in 2021.
Okay, and is it about hypnotherapy and about your life?
No, it's about my journey through trauma.
Okay.
And into recovery. So it's a memoir.
Okay.
And at the end, I share quite a lot about how, and I smiled when you said yoga, because earlier you said you do yoga, because yin yoga was one of the main tools I used to process the trauma in my body.
Okay.
I'm an absolute total advocate for yin yoga.
What is yin yoga now? I do Ashtanga.
Yeah, Ashtanga. So that's all. There's very fluid and lots of movement and breath included. Yin yoga is where you may take a pose and hold it for 3 minutes and you're making poses that stretch the fascia particularly. So pigeon pose, yikes! But you stay there for 3 minutes. And like
I wouldn't have the patience.
Stirrups. I need
to keep moving.
Yeah,
it's mad. That's the way my brain works. Though I'm 100 miles an hour.
You need to go. You keep going. My brain was going 100 miles an hour, and I needed to stop it. And I also needed to be able to feel. I needed to come back into my body. I'd had so much trauma. I was living somewhere out here. If anyone can't see my hands,
It's way up. It's way up.
Way up. I was living somewhere out there, and I needed to come back. And I read about yoga, and then when I was well enough, I went to a one-to-one yoga class, right? And I told her what had happened to me, and I told her I actually wasn't very functional on my left side at all at that point. I had no coordination, and so she did remedial yoga, and then I started to say to her, I can't get in touch with my feelings. No matter talk therapy doesn't do anything. I just have outbursts. And then she introduced me to yin yoga, and then I knew I was right. I was on the home run. I used to do yin yoga for an hour and a half every single day at home and bawl and bawl and bawl and bawl. I got in touch with my pain because it hurts to do yin yoga. And you stay in that edgy place where it's actually really uncomfortable. And that's where the emotions come from. And now there's a lot of science around that we actually store our trauma in our fascia. And the fascia, which is the bit that covers our muscles and everything, goes really tight and we hold everything. So stretching this fascia is a way of getting in touch with our emotions and our trauma and our feelings without talking about it. I didn't have words for what happened to me. It was so horrific. There was no, I could describe what happened on that boat, but it didn't go anywhere near touching the level of horror that I lived with in my body. And it was the yin yoga that really, really brought me forward. Then on top of that, I read about meditation and I thought, I'm going to have a go at that because my mind's so bloody chaotic. And I learned to meditate. And when I learned to meditate and when I learned to yin yoga in my bedroom, I used to shout with this tiny little farmhouse. I used to shout across the corridor to Nicola and I'd say, Nicola, I'm going to do my work. And she'd go, okay, Mum. And she'd switch off the Marilyn Manson. She was 13. She loved Marilyn Manson when I think back. But anyway, that was really heavy metal. And I used to do an hour and a half of that. And I knew I was headed for home. I could feel the changes.
Was this while you were still on the medication?
Coming to the end of the withdrawal. Once I reached about 0.5 of a milligram of Valium, I remember a friend visited me and she said, if you could have one thing in your life, Rachel, this is the depths I'd reached. She knew how I'd suffered. And she said, if you could have one thing in your life, Rachel, what would you ask for? And I turned around to her and I said, I'd like to smile again.
Okay.
So I started to smile.
Okay.
And Nicola said to me one day, she said, Mum, you smiled. And we both went, did I? And she said, you did.
Okay.
And that's where it began. And that's when I knew I had to keep doing this. And I knew then that I needed to be outside. I was so scared of going outside because my brain had gone crazy coming off the bends, the driest bends. I went outside and I literally asked the universe. I said, please give me back something here. I've nothing. I've no friends, no life, no car because I couldn't drive, wasn't allowed to because of the seizures. And I lived in the middle of nowhere, which was the ironic thing. And slowly, one step in front of the other, quite literally, I built mental health step by step. And that's why I'm so sort of strong in this. Don't just do the 1 hour therapy a week. That isn't enough. You got to show up for yourself on all levels. It's body, mind, heart, soul stuff. And we have to, unfortunately, put in, and I call it in capitals, every time I write about it on Instagram, the work in capital letters. It is the work. And I've come from places that I hope no one ever has to reach, genuinely. But I do speak from experience that we can heal and we can change our lives around and we can have what we wish to have, but we've got to show up for the work. We have to, you know. And you don't. What I love about YouTube is we can find out how to do stuff through. That's how I learned. I learned yoga through YouTube. I learned how to meditate through YouTube, and I was too scared to leave my home. And that doesn't say that we don't need therapy and we don't need professionals. We absolutely do. I went every week, twice a week, to this lady in Clonakilty, and she just staved the madness off me. And she told me, you know, you're not well, but you're going to come through this. But on top of that, I was working then. Once I'd made some ground, I was working all the time on myself at home until I was fit to return to life and build this life that I love now. And I'm in a relationship. My gorgeous Nicola, the one who put up with all the rubbish, she lives in London and, you know, she's leading a phenomenal life and she's a very empowered young lady and exciting in her own right from where she's come from, believe me. And so I would say that, yeah, life has taken and life has pulled me to places. But without sounding trite, I'm kind of glad because I have something that I know stuff. So when clients come to me,
I know stuff.
Yeah, you know, I've seen it and I know it. And when somebody says this, I know stuff.
You can relate to it.
Yeah, you know. And there's a wisdom that comes from these experiences. It's taken 25 years for the wisdom to come in, but there is a wisdom, and I'm grateful for that wisdom. It helps me in my work. You know, it brings a dimension to my work that I definitely don't think would have been there if I hadn't have. Dare I say it? I'm almost scared to say it, had the privilege of so much trauma.
So it's a way of flipping trauma on its head, though, isn't it? By saying, you know, look, this happened to me, but I've come through it. I'm a better person as a result of it, and I've kind of flipped it on its head, saying that it's a privilege.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, people say, would you change your life? Of course I wouldn't want anyone to suffer, and I didn't want to suffer, and I wouldn't want Nick to die and Dominic to die, and you know, Nicola actually lost her sight in one of her eyes during all of this as well. I wouldn't wanted any of that to happen, but just for me personally, as I'm saying who I am in 54 looking back, I think I'd rather the person I am now than the person I was probably destined to be.
Well, on that note, what advice would you give young people today?
Do you have 3 more hours?
I this one quick.
I knew you were going to ask this, and you know, I was kind of, because there's so many things you'd love to say.
I know.
I think it's to do with agency. Take agency over your life. Question realities, question the narrative, question the norms, and make your own decision. Don't be scared to formulate an opinion and, you know, have a slant on something, because I think that we're not asked to do that enough anymore. Critical thinking, I think, is such a valid attribute to have in life. It got me to where I am, you know.
And you think that it's not happening now because of social media and because we're being fed information, or media in general is feeding us information, or what's stopping the critical thinking?
I'm not sure that we were ever really encouraged to be critical thinkers in general, because school doesn't make you really a critical thinker. You know, it pretends to, but it doesn't really.
Well, it teaches you to learn off stuff and then repeat it, and regurgitate it back out again.
It does, doesn't it?
Is actually the reality.
And to conform, really, because school uniforms, and that's all conformity, and conforming to the type of job you might do. Academics is conformity. I think that discourse is such an interesting and important thing for people to learn, to debate, to question, but to question with an open heart and not with argument. So I think that's what I kind of like to leave young people with: agency and discourse, and don't be scared to own your place with your opinion, even if it's not popular. There's always more than the study of one. There's always going to be somebody who's going to be in your tribe, and I think I've learnt that, and I suppose I'm only finding my voice now, and I'm 54. Okay, a bit of developmental delay, a few years, but I love.
You're like one of those kids, you know, the ones that are just a little bit slow, and everyone's a bit worried about them, but they just take off. Then, you know, once, they take off really quiquickly.
Yeah, when they go around the corner,
they're all right.
It'll be fine.
But you know, life can begin at whatever age you want it to begin at.
For sure.
And I think that you spoke about wisdom and the fact that you're so wise now because of the trauma, but I actually think there's a huge wisdom in, you know, an untapped wisdom in older women who've lived lives and who now are allowed to live their lives even fuller because of I suppose healthcare is coming along. We're not as oppressed as we used to be. We're standing up for ourselves quite rightly, and, you know, pointing out things that are wrong or that have been wrong and asking for help, demanding help. Isn't that right?
That's so true. Absolutely. And, you know, the menopause has a bad rap, and it does have, you know, negative effects on our bodies and our minds, and screws up our thinking and all the things that come with it. However, there are secrets and there are benefits to the menopause.
Of course. And we're going to live a third of our lives.
Yeah,
and be positive
that's the whole
it.
thing. And I say, do you know what comes from it? For me, anyway, my experience, and I've shared it with a lot of other women. I call it the fuck it phase. You know, who gives a damn?
I know, it really
is.
You
start to care less about that. Do I blend? Do I fit in? Am I okay? You start to care a little bit less about that. And
who the fuck wants to blend in?
Exactly.
It's not fun.
I know.
It's more fun being out there.
Let's wear orange and all sorts of colours.
Let's go mad.
Let's go crazy.
What's the meaning of life?
The meaning of life. Now, that could take days as well. I was thinking about this. What is the meaning of life? For me, the meaning of life is, because I'm so new into working, I'm a teenager in the workforce, is this purpose, having purpose. I love it. I feel so valid, you know, and validated by what I do and helping people. So it has to be purpose mixed with meaning for me. And the meaning is that I return to my roots. I return to being outside in I hate the word when they say in the nature, but it is in the nature. Working and yet staying true to my natural way of being, which is actually being alone, out walking, enjoying the wind and the rain and the sounds, and just knowing that actually I made it, I'm here. And when I see, a crack or in the stone or the sun coming out, I just go, geez, I am actually alive. And I think for me, that gives me the greatest sense of everything. I'm here. Still?
You certainly are. Rachel, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me. I live in Galway, and I have my...
Are you going to give your address?
No, I'm not going to give my address, don't worry. I don't think I'll do that.
Like, don't be that open, Rachel. I just mean like socially. I just mean, what's your website?
Yeah. Well, I work from my home office in Galway. I work online, and social media, Instagram, which is one of my favourite platforms, I love it, is Rachel V Gotto. So that's Rachel Victoria. So it's the V for Victoria, Gotto, Gotto. And I'm on LinkedIn at Rachel Gotto. I'm on, now it's called X, isn't it? Rachel Gotto. Everything is Rachel Gotto, actually. My website's rachelgotto.com.
And it's an unusual name, so you won't be able to forget it. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's great. Thank you, Laura. It's lovely to talk to you.